All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Bennett Skolnick, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Plunderphonics, music sampling and copyright law. So, I'm sure most of you might be familiar with the term sampling when it comes to music, but if you aren't, that's okay. In essence, it's when you take a segment from an already existing song and you implement it into a song that you're creating. And, this can be a vocal line, it can be a drum beat, it can be a melody, some kind of synth, you name it. It's been around for a very long time, this technique, and it's been around. The first ever sample that was recorded was in 1971 by John Congos in his song "He's Gonna Step on You Again." Now, put that in perspective. That's more than 50 years ago. And today, it's still a popular technique in electronic music, hip hop, and pop, among so many other genres of music. And, it's common practice to get permission from the sample creator to use something that they made in your song. But as we're going to learn, that isn't always the case. And that's because of something called plundering. Now, sampling and plundering are similar in the sense that you're both taking segments from already existing recordings, but they differ in approach and intent. Where sampling, using extracted segments, melodies, drum beats, vocal lines. In plundering, you're deconstructing, you're manipulating, you're recontextualizing existing recordings almost exclusively. It's often likened to like collage art, where you take an X-Acto knife and a magazine and some glue, and you cut out a piece of the magazine and put it on a new canvas. Plunderphonics is essentially the audio equivalent of that, where you're taking existing recordings and you're pasting it into a new piece, right? And due to the nature of this, using a lot of samples, you're going to find that a lot of people use unauthorized samples because it's so hard to clear samples. So the word plunderphonics actually comes from this guy named John Oswald, and he's a Canadian composer, a saxophonist, and he's a media artist. And he came up with the term at the Wired Society Electroacoustic Conference in Toronto in 1985. Excuse me. In his essay, he says that a sampler, in essence a recording, transforming instrument, is simultaneously a documenting device and a creative device, in effect reducing a distinction manifested by copyright. Ooh, okay. What does that mean, though? So to explain it in a bit more simple terms, musical instruments create sounds, right? If you just have a guitar, it's not going to make music, okay? It's just going to sit there, and you're going to make some weird sounds with it. It's the composers and the musicians that produce music, right? They record people, they put it onto a format that you can then listen to on a CD player, the radio, tape, right? Nowadays it's all about streaming, but when you think about tape and recordings and radios, they're essentially reproducing sound. They're reproducing sounds that were already recorded and edited and mixed and whatnot, what have you. So here's where we get into some strange territory. Let's say we have a hip-hop scratch artist, right? And they are essentially using a record and a needle as almost like an electronic washboard, right? They're creating unique sounds, and sounds that are not reproduced. Okay? So now the record player is now an instrument. Okay? So this is pretty controversial just because what's on this record is probably copyrighted material, and it's being used in a new way, to be essentially a creative instrument. So this basically contradicts traditional notions of copyright law. We're using unauthorized samples, we're using other people's intellectual property, and it's unclear if this is considered fair use. Take, for example, Negative Land. This is one of their albums. This is probably their most controversial album. You can see it says U2 in big letters, and then Negative Land in small letters. If you're not familiar with U2, they're a popular rock band. They somehow managed to get their music onto like every iPhone ever. So yeah, they're pretty big. And this is the album that Negative Land made. Look, U2, right? So in this album, there's a lot of unauthorized samples from the rock band U2. And it's a satirical, critical exploration of the media culture and intellectual property and the power dynamics between artists and corporate entities. In this album, they sample stuff from U2's music, from their interviews, and other copyrighted material, and they recontextualized it into this new soundscape. And I think what they were trying to go for was they're trying to critique the commodification of art, the cult of celebrity, and the influence of mass media. So as a result of this controversial album, Island Records, who is representing U2, the band, they pursued legal action. And they argued that the band Negative Land is attempting to profit from U2's popularity as well as copyright infringement, which honestly, it totally makes sense. I mean, they're using their music and their interviews in their recordings. And, the album cover itself, I mean, it looks like a U2 album that is called Negative Land. So it's misleading. In their defense, in Negative Land's defense, they claimed the album was a work of parody and social commentary. They contended their use of U2's material was transformative, and it served as a critical and satirical purpose. But in the end, these defenses didn't hold up, and they ended up ceasing production and distribution of the album. It is still on YouTube if you want to find it. It's pretty crazy to listen to, but I digress. So, what did this lawsuit actually? What were the effects of it? Well, the controversy actually propelled Negative Land to like a cult status. They ended up writing a book about the whole experience, and in essence, sparked discussions of copyright law and fair use. But what actually is fair use, right? It's a legal argument that says you can use someone else's content as long as certain circumstances are met. These are like criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching. You can use someone else's content for research and all those other things. And it can be traced back to English common law principles. So it's been around for quite a long time, but the modern interpretation in the U.S. was shaped by judicial decisions, which means that what constitutes as fair use has evolved over time through different legislative developments. So the thing about fair use is that it's really dodgy. I mean, it's subject to change. It's based on previous court rulings, previous legislative amendments, and on top of that, there are always shifts in societal norms that change what fair use might actually be. So what constitutes as fair use in one context or era, it may differ from another. So fair use in the digital era, now that we're in the digital era, copying and sharing and remixing digital content is super easy to do, but it also complicates notions of copyright and fair use. So like the transformative nature of memes and remixes and parodies, it kind of blurs the line between original creation and derivative works. And this is exacerbated by the legal uncertainties and differing interpretations of fair use. So when it comes to music, as technology evolves, sampling has become way easier, and it's almost like common practice. It's integral to the culture and sound of different genres like future funk, vaporwave, hip hop, especially trip hop. That's another one. But Plunderphonics takes it to another level, and it really presents a unique challenge to traditional copyright law. Which leads us to the question of, how do these technological advancements in the music production impact the interpretation of fair use? Do these advancements blur the line between original creation and derivative works? Are 20th century copyright laws stifling 21st century art? So to give you an example of how complex and strange music sampling copyright laws have been, let's just take this for an example. So Fatboy Slim, some of you may have heard of him. He was pretty big in the 90s. He's still pretty big. He made this song called Michael Jackson. And in this song, he used this sample of he got off of a CD, like a Christian CD that he just found in a basement, which is honestly pretty badass if you ask me. Enter Negative Land again. They made before Fatboy Slim made that song, Negative Land made a CD called Escape from Noise, in which they used the same exact sample that Fatboy Slim used. And keep in mind, this was an unauthorized sample. They weren't really allowed to use this sample. But since they made the song, SST, which was Negative Land's former record label, they saw that Fatboy Slim had used the same sample, and they said, "We stole that sample first, now give us money." And Fatboy Slim did, and that's just how it goes. So Fatboy Slim is essentially paying for sampling a sample that was already previously unauthorized to be used as a sample. You also have other instances in which this is a pretty commonplace problem. Take, for instance, DJ Shadow's Introducing, which came out in 1996. This album is recognized to be the first album to use exclusively samples from record stores. If you go to a record store, you find bargain bin vinyl, and he pretty much used stuff like that. He was interviewed, and he was explaining that clearing samples is still a litigious and complex process. He said that some people have reasonable expectations of what they think the usage is worth, and some don't. There are people who are artistic scruples about their music being used, and there are some people who aren't. And the third problem is sometimes you just can't find the people who actually made the sample that you're sampling. Either the labels don't exist, or they've grown so much that they don't actually know where the original tapes are. So there have been efforts to fix this system. Take, for instance, in 2018, the Music Modernization Act. So this was a legislative act that was designed to address the complexities of sampling in the digital age and to address copyright infringement. And it was trying to modernize copyright law, and in all fairness, it did establish a streamlined process for licensing for digital music services, and it still is a significant step towards clarifying the legal framework around music sampling. But the problem is, obtaining necessary licenses is still a complex and time-consuming process, especially for artists who experiment with Plunderphonics. The extensive use of samples means that you have to get necessary mechanical licenses for every sample that you use. And this limits the scope of creative expression, it imposes limitations on creative freedom, and it led to stricter regulations and requirements. And on top of this, there are still so much uncertainty and legal risks as what constitutes as fair use. So the ambiguities in the law, the ongoing disputes over fair use. It basically is a disaster, and it leads to legal challenges for artists who experiment with plunderphonics. On top of this, we have AI generated music now. It's 2024. This is a subject that is very new to a lot of people, but AI generated music is becoming more and more normal. And in all fairness, it does offer a lot of opportunities for creativity and innovation. It lets artists explore new sonic territories and experiment with new sounds. But the problem is, huge companies are putting resources into AI generated music, like OpenAI, who made ChatGPT, Google, who made Music LM, which is an existing, really interesting AI music generator, and Facebook has made their own as well. But the thing is, they use vast data sets of audio recordings to analyze patterns, trends, and stylistic elements, and it's not clear whether or not these companies acquire these licenses to train their AIs. So AI generated samples, it really blurs the line between original creation and derivative work. The algorithmically produced sounds are based on learning patterns and styles that may be copyrighted. We don't really know. And there's no firm copyright framework that protects artists from their music being used. And so I think that there needs to be a significant change in how we perceive copyright within the music industries and audio industries as well. We need to foster a more nuanced and equitable framework. We need to create one that has the interests of artists, copyright holders, and the public in mind. We need to crack down on generative AI, because how can they use all this copyrighted material to train their AI, and we can't use a sample without going into debt for using a sample, and we need to ensure that experimental genres like plunderphonics can thrive. Honestly, I did forget to do a thank you for watching slide, so I'm just gonna make one right now. Thank you. And yeah, thank you guys.